And to further explore our theme of reconciliation, we are next going to welcome a leader who's driving a reconciliation process on the ground across an entire country, and a very big country. And that country is Australia. Our guest has come a very long way to tell us about the Australian nation and the Aboriginal people of Australia. So please give a very warm welcome to the CEO of Reconciliation Australia, Karen Mundine. Karen, please come and join me on stage. Hi, Karen, welcome. So lovely to have you here with us. So, Karen, you head an organization that promotes and facilitates reconciliation by building relationships, respect, and trust between the wider Australian community and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So to start with, I guess, could you maybe give us a little bit more background, especially for those of us who are in France and may not be so aware as are British friends, for instance, or from elsewhere in Northern Europe. Tell us more about the history of First Nations peoples following the arrival of European settlers.
Thank you, Charlotte. I think before we go into what happened when the British arrived, I think we have to go back to who we are as First Peoples of Australia. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have lived on the continent of Australia. We can trace our ancestors back 60,000 years. We are one of, if not the oldest continuous living culture in the world. So 60,000 years of experience of living, of being connected and being connected to country and to community and society. 250 odd or so years ago, the British arrived and it upended our world. And although our story is unique, it is also not unusual for any country or communities or societies that have been colonised. With the new arrivals, with the settler state, came dismantling of our communities, of our language, of our culture. It changed everything about our way of life. But that being said, we are still here. We still continue to fight for our identity, for our culture, and for our way of life and thinking and being and doing. That becomes part of the uniqueness of what is Australian. It is something to be shared and not just held tightly by us.
So what is the current state of affairs right now in Australia? Would you say that Australia is a nation that is reconciling and reuniting, maybe?
We talk about reconciliation in the context of Australia as a journey, and it is very much a journey, and like all of them, sometimes you get that straight shot and sometimes you've got that rocky road and a little detours along the way. In the last 30 years, we've had this formal idea and this formal process of reconciliation, and in that time it coincided with civil rights movements. We saw lots of laws change that brought the life of First Nations peoples, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, into parity in some respects with the broader Australian community. But we have not been embraced, and our unique rights as First Peoples are yet to be fully recognised. Our people still find ourselves at the lower end of every socio-economic indicator, and when it comes to women in particular, and women and children, that becomes even further pronounced. So it's a rocky road. There have been some wins along the way. Most recently, we had a referendum in Australia. It's very rare. We've only had 45 in the 200 odd years, and only 8 of those have actually been passed. And the referendum was simply to acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people within our Australian Constitution to have a body that would advise governments and parliaments to think about how we better embrace us as peoples and how we integrate that into a broader Australian community. Unfortunately, the public were not convinced by our arguments, and that has had an effect on our relationship. It's created suspicion, it's created distrust, and we know that these things are so essential if we are to build a better society, if we are to create a harmonious relationships between the First Peoples and other Australians. So we're in a kind of one step forward, two steps back kind of dance at the moment, but I am continuing to be quite positive and hopeful that actually we will move past this, and like every relationship, it will have its ups and downs, but we will find ways to come together to dialogue and to work through our differences.
Karen, you mentioned women earlier. We know that some systemic issues like climate change, for instance, are affecting women a lot more. So in what ways are Aboriginal women in particular impacted by the circumstances you described?
So again, the history of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women with the colonial settlers has always been a history of subjugation. Our women have been victims of violence and continue to be victims of violence. It has set up, I guess, how people think about us. When it comes to incarceration rates, we have a horribly increasing number of women going into our jails and prison systems. That has its knock-on effect with children being removed. It has knock-on effects for women who take the heavy lifting of keeping culture alive, of picking up the pieces when other members of families are incarcerated or are indisposed. And so that then limits opportunity for education, opportunity for employment, opportunity for creating better outcomes. But that being said, I've been doing this work for about 25, going on 30 years now, but it's been women who's been leading the charge. And I believe because we've been disproportionately affected and impacted by these outcomes and these processes, it's actually women who are coming up with the solutions, who are, as we heard before, sitting, listening, doing the deep listening, doing the hearing, and looking for the opportunities to navigate and create better outcomes, because it affects our children, our nieces, our nephews, our extended families. And so while we are most affected disproportionately, we're also those that are creating the opportunities for change.
So what are the key steps you advocate to achieve greater reconciliation in Australia?
We have defined reconciliation through 5 dimensions, and we've drawn this from a lot of reconciliation processes from around the world, and particularly as it affects First Peoples from around the globe. And many of these things are very similar to the conversations we've been having and will be having over the next couple of days. It is about racial equity. It's about equality and equity, so not just about becoming similar in our socioeconomic outcomes. It's also understanding as First Peoples we have a stake in this country, in the land, in the environment, but also in the society as well. It's about institutional integrity. All of our institutions, our businesses, our governments, our policymakers, our civil societies have a stake in this, and that they must be participating and making changes within their systems that is inclusive of First Nations peoples' equality. It's got to be about unity, and it's got to be about historical acceptance. As I said, we cannot move forward without understanding where we have come from. Until we learn the lessons of our past, until we grapple with how that continues to play out within our systems, it continues to create inequalities, we're not going to make the changes that are actually necessary and sustainable to create better outcomes and a united Australia.
Karen, tell us a bit more about your approach at Reconciliation Australia. You have developed those reconciliation action plans, RAPs, that's their acronym. So tell us more about them and maybe what positive evolutions you are witnessing. And what do you think is the story that your people can teach the rest of the world?
So RAPs, Reconciliation Action Plans, the thing we're most known for. In simple terms, it's a business plan. It is how an organisation and a business can actually make a contribution to reconciliation, and it's based on really 3 simple ideas. It's about relationships, it's about respect, and it's about opportunities. And when you have those first two things, we build good relationships that are based on respect and the idea that you are bringing something to the table that I can deeply listen to and I can learn from, then it creates opportunities for business, for companies, for society. And that's it in a nutshell. We've got 3,600 organisations that we work with, from top ASX-listed companies, multinational companies, some of whom are here. We've got government agencies, we've got schools, we've got hospitals, you name it. Because it actually takes all parts of our society to be part of this. It is not just up to governments, it's not just up to First Nations peoples. We have a saying that reconciliation is everyone's business, and we absolutely believe that. When it comes to the impacts, and I guess where to next, First Nations people have been doing deep listening. We've been thinking holistically about how every aspect impacts our lives and actually creates better outcomes for all of us. We can't separate out our political life and our spiritual life and our artistic life and our business life. All of these things are interrelated, and it's only when we get those things into balance that we see the opportunity to create more and to create different. And so that's what I think First Nations people have to say. Women and matriarchy is very much fundamental to part of our society, but it's not one over the other. It's again in balance and in harmony.
Thank you very much. One more thing before we part ways. One word maybe that is key to reconciliation, according to you. You mentioned trust, you mentioned respect. What's the key word here to achieve reconciliation?
Courage. I think it takes courage on all of our parts. We can talk about business, we can talk about politicians and the roles that they have to play, but someone has to say things must change. Someone has to say this is not good enough anymore. And sometimes that takes courage to be that lone voice to make a difference.
Courage from a brave lady. Thank you so much, Karen Mundine. Thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it. Thank you.